So you ready for the second part? Yes. I think the second part would be, you would find a little bit easier, less heavy on the equations, and more focus on findings and practical solutions. Now we are going to become pragmatic and find practical solutions for our problems. Because initially when I started the talk, I started talking about risks, intrinsic risks, extrinsic risks. Then I got involved in explaining the simulation model, and I didn't offer any solution to you. And at the end, I kind of gave you a very disappointing statement saying that, oh, knowing that the evacuation time of a venue is how many minutes is not going to save anybody's life. But that is true. That is a realization I had after I calibrated my model and I had the full functioning model at hand. My question was, how is this going to help anybody? How is this going to become a lifesaver in the case of Hajj, for example? The answer is that a simulation model is only one aspect of crowd safety. You need to look at a more comprehensive, at a bigger picture, okay? But also simulation models can be helpful in terms of improving crowd safety in the ways that I'm about to explain to you. In 3 different ways. So this is a genuine question I had. Oh, and that's the only paper that has made its way without my knowing. I didn't intend to put it. It's just there. Now that it's there, in 2019, while you were in Melbourne, I was having this question that this model, how can it result in more efficient crowds? How can these models be utilized to optimize crowd processes, including in the cases of evacuations? Then I came up with this conceptual categorization in 3 different ways. You can use this model as one of the layers of bi-level programming approach. You're mostly familiar with it. If you're familiar with the notion of network design in vehicular traffic, you know that in the upper level of our bi-level programming, we have the programming and the objective function, and in the lower level, we have a traffic assignment module. Now think of the simulation model as a traffic assignment module, and your objective function is to minimize evacuation times. You can define certain variables that you can optimize in order to minimize the evacuation time. What could those variables be? It could be people's in a big venue. It could be people, people's reaction time, the departure time, or departure scheduling. For example, if this building was full to the capacity in every single room, optimal departure scheduling would let us know which room should evacuate first, which room should evacuate last, and which room should evacuate in the middle. And also in terms of pathfinding, it can tell us that this room should go through this path, that room should go through the other path. And the combination of the departure schedule and pathfinding could be the solution that you get from that sort of bi-level programming that I am talking about, okay? That is what I call mathematical optimization of evacuations. How is simulation model useful to that? Well, in order to do that, you need to have a traffic assignment module, and your simulation is a traffic assignment. For example, I simulate the building given certain departure schedule, and I get this evacuation time. Then I change the departure schedule and pathfinding, and I simulate it again, and I get another evacuation time. And using this, I can optimize and find out that what departure scheduling and what route planning is optimal. It's good. It gets you published in journals like European Journal of Operations Research. It's very good for publication because you get something that is fancy. It's got lots of constraints and a big fat objective function, which is what you need for a good publication in a high-level operational research journal. Except when it comes to applications of it are limited. Because in the case of an emergency, if something happens, if, for example, in a big venue consisting of several rooms and environments, somebody hears gunshots, it is really hard to tell people, by the way, we have an optimal planning process here. You guys have to stay until this room and that room evacuate first. And once you are out, you have to go through this specific path. This is really hard to enforce, right? In the heat of an emergency, even if you have that plan, it is really impractical to enforce it. Another way you can use this simulation model is to optimize the architecture of buildings, right? But what can you do to the architectures of buildings? I don't think much. First of all, most of our buildings have already been built, and the ones that are being built, we are not being consulted to say, is the building good for evacuation purposes? They usually build it anyway, okay? And once they build it, for example, with this building, what is it that I can change? There is not much. The walls are the walls. The tables cannot be removed. There are many elements of the building that are not under our control anymore. So once they are built, they are built. There are certain elements of bad design that you can avoid, but once a building is free of bad design, there is not much else that you can do to improve the process of crowd evacuations. There are also some misconceived notions that, for example, this comes from a paper in Nature that initially proposed the social force model, that if you put an obstacle in front of a bottleneck, this is going to somehow facilitate the movement of people and shorten evacuation time. We have tested it in laboratory time and time again. My colleagues in Spain have tested it time and time again. It just doesn't work like that. Putting an obstacle in front of people does not make the evacuation any faster. It does so in the social force model of helping when the parameters are misspecified, when the parameters are not properly calibrated. So it is basically an artifact of a misspecified modeling that we have never been able to replicate in reality. So while architectural optimization is also an option, I don't think it's a very, very effective solution. As long as you don't have bad designs, that's it. That's all you can do about the architecture. But there is another thing, behavioral optimization. We are talking about the system, right? How about, what if a system could optimize through the behavior of its constituents, which in this case are people, agents. What if people can adopt individualized strategies, generic strategies, that at the end, at the system level, would result in a more efficient movement time? Would that be something to consider? What if people know about certain aspects of behavior that if they change a little, the whole process of the crowd would be more efficient? So this is something that I started thinking about in around 2018 and 19, and I called it behavioral optimization, something that we do not really think about or didn't used to think about in crowd dynamics. Optimizing the crowd from within, without any external control, without dictating to people where to go or when to initiate their movement or changing their environment. Given the environment, how can people make some behavioral changes to make the situation more efficient? What got me into this was the fact that I had the simulation model. So I thought to myself, this simulation model that I have, it looks like I am like God to these agents. They do whatever I ask them to do in terms of behavior. All I have to do is to change these behavioral parameters in certain ways, and they will show a different type of behavior with respect to exit choice, for example. Yes, the list of the parameters that I showed you, the 20 parameters that I showed you at the end, that is the level of parameters that would replicate the likely behavior of people. You know what I'm saying? The behavior that we are expecting people to show. But I can deviate from that behavior by changing those parameters, right? The default parameters that I have specified, now I can deviate. So I got curious. I thought, well, now that I'm the master to these people, these agents, they do whatever I want them to do, what if I change the behavior of these agents in the crowd in terms of reaction time in this way? And in terms of exit choice, I change the behavior a little this way. I change the tendency of people to, for example, imitate the behavior of people in exit choice a little, and or in exit choice changing, or in other aspects. And I realized that the impact on the system is huge, especially for certain parameters, for certain aspects of behavior. So I started thinking, well, these things could be translatable to strategies to people. If I find out that if people deviate from their normal behavior in a certain direction with respect to a certain aspect of decision making, if I find that out and I can translate that somehow to people and ask them to adopt it, to do this change in their actual behavior, then we might be able to optimize crowds. It could be 4 or 5 different strategies that everybody can learn, for example. It could be something as simple as a swimming safety lesson that you get at the school, where they give you some tips in order to survive in the water, for example. This could be my tips that could be shared at the schools in order to have a more efficient evacuation. So I started this whole journey of using this simulation tool for behavioral optimization purposes, to find out what types of behavior with respect to every layer of the model, with respect to every aspect of decision making, could be more optimum to relative to what people are doing currently in the real world. So that is what I'm going to be talking about. But I also promised you a more comprehensive framework. These two things have an interplay, so let's park that aside. Let me introduce you to the Swiss cheese model, which goes towards your question as well. This is what I did in the aftermath of Itaewon disaster. I started thinking the whole crowd safety thing. I thought we have been talking about modeling, lots of people, thousands of publications, 9 to 10,000 research papers, at least last time I checked and analyzed them, have been published in it. So how is it that things like that are still happening in the real world? Realize that what we are doing are detached from reality. We are doing things for publication. We are doing things that are good for European Journal of Operations Research and Transportation Research, Part E, etc., etc., and that has nothing to do with what we need to do in real world in saving the lives of people. So I thought, let's rethink crowd safety, see what we need, see what we have to do. Is simulation modeling really the big thing, the whole deal? And in a conceptual model, I introduced the Swiss cheese model of crowd safety. And that was following the crowd safety summit that I held a few months after the Itaewon disaster. And that was the outcome of the discussion conversations somehow that were held during that summit. What is the Swiss cheese model? The notion of Swiss cheese model is not original to crowd safety. It's a notion that has been traditionally used in high-risk industries such as nuclear facilities, aviation, etc., etc., where error, including human error, is a thing. Okay? So we are talking about the situation where we have risk, but we want the risk to not materialize in our system. Okay, we want to stop the risk. What do we usually do in those kind of situations? In a nuclear facility, in an aviation situation, we put a barrier, we put a protection layer, we put some form of protection to stop the risk from affecting our system. Let's think of it, for example, in the form of cybersecurity. Okay, you are running a university, and you know that there is a risk of cyber attack, right? What do? Well, you say, I'm going to put an authentication system for my staff when they're going to log in to have to go and authenticate on their phone, etc. And that reduces the likelihood of my system to be hacked. Is that right? That I call that a layer of protection. Okay? The thing is, in any high-risk industry or situation, a single layer of protection could help, but it's not going to guarantee that disasters and bad outcomes are not going to happen. This is simply because of the fact that no single layer of protection is flawless. There is always flaws in the system. And you can liken that to a layer of Swiss cheese that has some holes in it, right? Those are vulnerabilities in the protection that you put in place, okay? And risk can get through it, okay? You can have authentication system, but a very powerful cyber attack can get through it, for example, for some reason. That means that you have a hole in the system. But what if you have another layer of protection behind that, right? Yes, the attackers can get through the authentication system, but you have another layer of protection, and at that layer, you stop the cyber attack. Yes, it doesn't matter that they got through the authentication system, as long as you stopped it some way, somewhere along the way. Is that right? So that second layer could stop this risk to get to your system at the end. The thing is, when you have two layers of protection, the likelihood of both layers failing at the same time is much lower compared to the likelihood of a single layer failure, right? The only way that can happen, risk materializing, is that these two Swiss cheese layers have holes that are exactly in the same spot. You know what I'm saying? That's in terms of the analogy. If those holes do not align, then we can stop the risk from affecting our system somewhere along the way. And that's all we need in terms of protecting systems that are at risk. It doesn't matter if some layers fail, as long as one layer can stop the risk from materializing and affecting our system and resulting in catastrophes, then that's a favorable outcome. I started thinking crowd safety from that perspective. And I thought, what could be the Swiss cheese layers of crowd safety? Crowd safety is a high-risk situation. What would be the layers? The first layer is legislation. If we have legislation, then that would mandate planning and everything else. So as long as we don't have that, nobody would be motivated to do simulation and planning. Once it's mandated, once there is a requirement that prior to Taylor Swift concert, you have to do simulation and documentation and everything, then the stadium authorities would do it. If there is no mandate, this kind of thing is costly. It's going to cost you $50,000, $30,000 or so. So the stadium might take their chances and not do it. So the first layer would be having a mandate and legislation. The second layer is, prior to a crowded event, we do pre-planning. We do simulation. And simulation comes here. It's part of our pre-planning, right? We try to simulate the situation at the concert and have an estimate of the evacuation time. We do risk assessment, etc., etc. But is that enough to prevent a disaster? That's where the thinking was, that if we have good simulation model, we are fine. Absolutely not. That is just one layer of Swiss cheese model with lots of holes in it, by the way. There are a lot of holes in it. Why? Because the models are not perfect. Even the model that I showed you, and I defended very vigorously every question you asked, no, the model is good, the model is good. It's not actually perfect. There are certain levels of accuracy that you can get from every model, okay? And there's no model in the world that would be a perfect replication of reality. Secondly, even if the model was perfect, which is not, the input that you give to this model, there is a huge level of uncertainty in terms of the input. I cannot, as the modeler, I cannot guarantee the accuracy of your input. Okay, if you come to me as the stadium authority and say, I want you to simulate my event, I would be asking questions. How many people do you have? You can say, well, we have sold 80,000 tickets, but it might go up to 95. So which one is it? We don't know. Simulate somewhere in between. So I have to work with uncertainty. How many male, how many female? We don't know from the tickets, sorry. So I cannot have that input in the information. Age range, I don't know. You go and figure it out, just uncertainty. So the input is uncertain to the model, okay? On the day, it might be a different outcome because I worked with uncertain information and information with certain level of accuracy. So the whole thing might fail despite your best efforts in pre-planning and risk mitigation on the day, during a crowded event, during a crowded situation, during a Halloween night, during a Hajj ritual, things might happen in a very, very different way that you did not predict. Therefore, once the risk goes through this layer and goes through this layer, two holes aligning, the risk is coming through, Is there any other layer we can have? Operational level. Operational level means that you need to monitor and control the crowd using visual monitoring, using sensors that can estimate density at different locations. I was talking about noise sensors that can listen to the noise of the crowd and identify the distress of the crowd. If the crowd is in distress, nobody is doing that. I'm left and right and center talking about it to see who is going to pick that up. And also monitoring social media as a form of measuring the crowd situation. So these operational control, computer vision, sensors, and social media monitoring could stop a risk from materializing in the last second. Yes, we did our planning, we did our legislation, it wasn't enough, a disaster was about to happen, but because we had good operational control, we detected the risk right before it materialized, we took actions, and the risk didn't get to our system. And that's the favorable outcome, right? Doesn't matter if these two layers fail, if this layer can protect, that's fine, right? But what if this layer fails too? This is not going to guarantee that the system is not going to get affected by the risk. What if planning and operational control both fail and the risk gets to our system? What if our people in the field who are affected by the risk are savvy and clever and knowledgeable enough to show actions that would mitigate the risk or prevent the catastrophe altogether? Wouldn't that be a layer of Swiss cheese model? That is something we never thought about. We never think about the actual people as a layer of protection for people. This is the new paradigm. It goes consistently with behavioral optimization. So I thought of that as an additional layer. Of course, if that fails also, you want the emergency response to mitigate the situation. So the efficiency of the emergency response would be, this is like what Helai was saying, pre-accident, during accident, after accident. This is after accident. I'm not focused much on that. Hopefully we will never get to that, but this is the last layer of Swiss cheese model to mitigate the harm. But we are focusing on this now, okay? This layer. How can we have a community that is more resilient to risks around crowd safety? That is the very definition of community resilience. That when all external protections fail, the community itself can mitigate the impact, right? So how can the community do that? See, from experiments to model, I'm going to be back to experiments very soon. I've run all these series of simulation, computer simulation experiments, changing the behavior of people with respect to different aspects of their behavior, see how the system gets impacted. Turns out the system gets impacted very noticeably. Sometimes the optimal behavior is not the behavior that people are showing. For example, in this particular case, this dotted line shows the likely behavior of people. What is that? The calibrated parameters that I showed you here in a slide, the behavior that is expected of people. Now I deviate from it, and I see that the system gets a little more optimal. It means that if the entire crowd moves away from their likely behavior in a certain direction, what is this behavior? I'm not disclosing because it's going to confuse you. Just think of it as a certain aspect of decision making. It shows that if the crowd deviates from their likely behavior and makes certain adjustments to their thinking and decision making process, the system could be considerably more efficient, right? But how can you communicate this thing on computer with numbers related to parameters to people? Should I go and say to people, by the way, next time there is an evacuation, remember your beta 2 was minus 2.5? Make it minus 2. I cannot say that, can I? I have to translate that into something actionable to people. Yes, on my computer I can say that, but that is not translatable thing. So we will get to that. With respect to other aspects of behavior, also, this is the likely behavior. This is the deviation from likely behavior, usually results in better outcomes. I'll show you one example of it. I'm good with time. I'll show you one example of it. Let's just isolate one aspect of behavior about which we did not talk that much today. Reaction time. Reaction time. We are in a situation in a concert. Let's say that this is, or a cinema with 3 cinema halls, for example. And there's a gunshot noise. We realize that there is a threat, okay? Would the process of evacuation in that highly dense environment, where there are 3 movies running at the same time and all 3 cinema halls are full, would the situation be more efficient if people do the evacuation in a staged way? Meaning that the people who are closer to the door, they go first. The people who are further, they wait for the people who are closer to go. That's called a waiting strategy. Or, in another extreme, if every member of the crowd starts moving at the same time. Which strategy is more efficient for the survival of people and getting them out of the environment, assuming that outside this environment there is no danger, and the only danger is within this environment? Which strategy do you think is more efficient? First one? Second? Got 1 second? Well, the answer is second one. I'll show you the instant strategy simulation. This is when nobody hesitates. Come on. Yes. Nobody hesitates. Okay? The reaction time of every agent is 0. Okay? But here, there is a little bit of hesitation from some members of the crowd. Okay? So there is heterogeneity in reaction time. And here, there is a high level of heterogeneity, meaning that some people really, really prioritize other people, and they do not move until the other people go. This is something that at no cost can be experimented on a computer, right? And then we realize that, yes, if you are talking about evacuation time, this has the minimum evacuation time, and it's considerably smaller than the evacuation time here. Yes, this one has higher levels of crowding, and it's a bit less comfortable during the process. But if there is a gunshot situation, comfort is not the highest priority. If the comfort is not your highest priority, then you go with this strategy. But if you are creating a situation of departure where comfort is the key KPI, then you should go with this strategy. So this is what you get from the model, easily. Another thing would be when it comes to changing the behavior of individuals, people. It's called behavioral intervention. In no aspect in the society you can change the behavior of all people in a society. Even something as prominent as COVID vaccination, you could not convince the 100% of a population to get vaccinated during COVID, right? But was the vaccination pointless? No, because we realized soon that it is only enough to vaccinate a certain percentage of people. The uptake would be 80 to 85%, and the society would be fine. Is this the case in this situation as well? What if not every person follows the strategy that I am giving? I was curious. Would that negate the whole point of increasing system efficiency? So what I did, I created a range of simulated experiments where I increase little by little the percentage of the people who do the strategy that I want them to do. I start from 0%, and then I add little percentages to see the impact on the system. Excuse me. What I observed was that I really don't need 100% of the crowd to show the strategy that I want them to show. Usually when the concentration or the market penetration of good strategy hits 50%, 60%, the crowd is already efficient enough. The additional people adopting good strategy, it actually doesn't matter that much. So all I need to do is to convince 50-60% of the people, or to educate them, or to influence their behavior, and I get the vast majority of the benefit. This is just for one aspect of behavior. For different aspects of behavior, it's different. But with certain aspects of behavior, it is only sufficient to do 50% uptake, and the system would be almost fully efficient. Now, but remember I told you that models have artifacts, and you should not trust the findings of the models regardless with a blind eye, even if it is the model that I am advocating and trying to prove to you as an empirically validated model. When it comes to things like this that relate to life and death situations, you need to make sure that what you're recommending to people are solid. And I don't think running simulation models is just good enough for giving people instructions on how they should conduct themselves in crowded situations, including in emergency and non-emergency situations, right? So I went from experiments to developing a model, used that model to come up with certain behavioral strategies, and now, having those hypotheses at hand, I wanted to test those strategies. So from experiments to models, from models back to experiments. I wanted to test those strategies. So I told you that I came up with the notion of behavioral optimization in 2019, but then COVID hit and nobody could gather a crowd anywhere, right? You couldn't even go out of your house, let alone do an experiment. So I had these experiments playing in my head for a couple of years. I had acquired the funding. It takes a couple of $100,000 to do this experiment, comprehensive way that I want to do. I had the finding, the experiments were playing in my head, and I was imagining them for a couple of years until in 2022, finally I found a gap in restrictions, COVID restrictions, and did the experiments at UNSW. Still very stressful because I was worried that there's going to be a COVID outbreak in my experiments, and I'm going to be kicked out of the university for throwing a super spreader party. That would have been nice. If they kick me out, you're not going to take me. Now, what's the difference between these experiments and these experiments? Can somebody explain it to me and make me happy, please? I would be really appreciative if you can, just in simple terms, the philosophy of these experiments versus these experiments.
From individual to group?
What was my purpose of modeling up until experimentation? Up until, what did I do these experiments for overall? To do what? No, overall modeling. No, everything that I did. To develop a model. Parameters, estimation of parameters. To do what? To do predictions. Description of the process. So I can describe, simulate, and model crowd processes, right? But here, I'm no longer interested in what people are doing. Here, what I was interested in what people are doing so I can learn, translate it into models, and then translate it into simulation, right? Now I'm done with that. I want to know if I manipulate the behavior of people, how would the system change? You see the difference? Descriptive or observational, prescriptive or interventional. I'm not interested to know how people do exit choice anymore. I know that from before.
Are you manipulating the behavior of the people, or the behavior, or the formation of the test bed?
I am manipulating the behavior of people. I'll explain. So here I am manipulating the behavior of people, asking them to deviate a little from their behavior, see what happens in the system, to see if I can replicate the things that I observed in numerical experiments here in reality. The philosophy of these experiments, there is a huge range of them. 4 days of experimentation, 250 rounds, huge range of experimentations. But the philosophy is one thing. Bear with me here. I start with a crowd of naive people, and I focus on one aspect of behavior. I won't tell them anything. So the first 3 replications would be them doing a specific task, would be them doing a specific task without me manipulating their behavior. 3 times they would do it, right? And what is that task? It depends on the aspect of the behavior that I am focused on. This one, for example, is about bottleneck behavior at bottleneck. This one is about the speed of movement that they take. But that doesn't matter. They start with a crowd. We start with a crowd of naive participants. They do 3 repetitions. I observe the system, and then what I do is that I extract 20% of them. I say, come to the other environment, just take them somewhere away from the rest of the crowd, and I say, when you go back, with respect to this aspect of your behavior, for example, exit choice, you should adopt this strategy. Go back, mix up with the crowd, and do not tell anybody or communicate anything about what I told you with the rest of the crowd. And I let the system happen again. I repeat the scenario 3 more times. And then I see the system gets a little more efficient. Isn't it magic that I can take the people aside, 20% of them, say something to them twice. Just one sentence written on a script twice, and then they go back. And the system becomes more efficient. And then I do that with another 20%. Now I have 40% informed, 60%, 80%, and at the end I have 100% of people informed. And you will see that the system gets little by little more efficient. I will show you the results later. What aspect of behavior did I manipulate? I differentiate between 2 things: decision-making aspects and physical movement aspects. A reviewer asked me what is decision-making, because this whole set of experiments have been summarized in 3 papers on their review. One of them has come back to me, and their feedback has been really, really positive beyond my imagination. But this question was asked: what is physical aspect, what is decision-making? Decision-making is what takes more mental effort. Exit choice takes more mental effort than choosing my speed of movement. Speed, if I choose to walk fast, then I don't have to think about it. But exit choice, for making it, I have to think about it. So I manipulate decision-making aspects of people, and I manipulate physical movement aspects of people. Let's have a look at the outcomes. So when you do the experiments, then it comes at the end that individual by individual data extraction, the painful process that I was talking about, the thing that I really dread. But that's the way I do the experiments. I don't see any other way of doing these experiments without looking at the behavior of individuals one by one. That's the only way. So what do? I look at the decisions of these people. I need two metrics, 2 KPIs. One, listen, I need to establish that what I told people actually changed their behavior. A proof of behavioral intervention happening, right? For example, let's say that I isolated these people and told them, when you go back to the crowd, your strategy for exit choice is to follow the direction where the minority of people are going. When you go back to the crowd, with respect to your exit choice, I want you to do this. Choose the direction where the minority of people are going. This is exactly the way it goes in the experiments. I say it twice, they go, right? And say this is one of those individuals who got their strategy. I need to establish that these people actually change behavior, right? So I look at the behavior of every one of these yellow people who have that strategy, and I realize, and I look whether or not they were successful in implementing that strategy. Not in 100% of cases they were successful. In some cases they are successful. In some cases they cannot identify the minimum direction, right? But when I put the data all together, I realized that overall, yellow people were significantly more successful in choosing the direction of minimum flow compared to the blue people who were naive about this at the time. So therefore, the behavioral intervention has happened. So that's the first factor. I have to prove that the behavioral intervention has taken place. Or if I have told people to try to change their decision more often, I have to show that people actually who had their strategy did change the decision more often compared to the people who were naive about that strategy. That's proof of behavioral intervention. Once you have the proof of behavioral intervention, and in every case the behavioral intervention did take place, it really changed the behavior of people. Me saying those two sentences twice, it did affect some changes in people's behavior. I need to show how it affected the system, because the whole point of the behavioral intervention is system optimization, right? So I do that. This is a situation where 100% of the crowd was naive, and these are evacuation times. Forget about the lines, just focus on the bars. These are the evacuation times, total evacuation time and average of individual evacuation time. Usually they are correlated, so you can just look at them as one, right? The bars, and forget about the lines. This is a crowd that is 100% naive, and this is a crowd that has 20% only informed individuals. Yes, it's not as pretty as simulation modeling, is it? It's fluctuations, etc., because it's real world. It's experiment. There are judgment error involved and everything. But it just shows that overall, as I go from 100% naive to 0% naive and 100% informed, the system gets considerably more efficient. Here as well, the system little by little becomes more efficient, and here as well the system becomes more efficient. And in this side, I also test the impact of giving people bad strategies. Instead of giving them good strategies, I isolate them, and I say something that not too outlandish and strange, something that people might think is good, but I know is not good. I send them back, and I see that, in fact, the impact of misinformation and bad strategy is much worse than the impact of good strategy. The impact of bad strategy is so sharp. It impacts the system so immensely, even more than the benefit of good strategy. So that's the thing. When it comes to decision-making aspects, this is only decision-making, right? When it comes to decision-making, usually the impact of good strategy diminishes after 50%, and that is consistent with the simulation results that I showed you. You cannot maintain that up until the last thing. The first percentages bring you the best benefit. The last percentages does not have as much benefit. Same here as well. But when it comes to physical aspects of movement, for example, how they conduct themselves at a bottleneck, right? The impact on the physical aspect of movement is even more prominent and more tangible than decision making. First of all, people were more successful to change their physical movement aspects compared to the decision making. People find it easier when you tell them to increase your speed compared to do this for your exit choice. People are way more successful in implementing something physical compared to something involving decision making. Secondly, the impact on the system when you manipulate the physical aspect of movement is more tangible. Thirdly, the impact is usually linear, and it does not diminish by percentage. The impact is linear. The last percentage, the last 20%, brings the same relative benefit than the first 20%. So that's the difference between manipulating decision-making aspects of behavior compared to physical aspects of it. This is truly cutting edge of crowd science, to be honest, at this stage where we are talking about these things. And yeah, physical aspects of movement. I'm going to show you some examples, and he's going to tell me off if I go over time. So I'm a bit scared right now. This and that. Anyway, you got the idea. I'm going to show you some examples of this. So, social groups, for example. This is something we didn't talk about. If I have you guys here as individuals, 50 of us in this room, there is an emergency and we want to evacuate. Or if next time you are with your families here, same number of people, let's say 50 people, but in groups of 2, 3, and then they evacuate the same venue. The second one is going to take significantly longer than the first one. It is a well-established thing. I've shown in experiments in the past and in these experiments that the presence of social groups prolong evacuation. For what reason, doesn't matter right now. Let's just say that this is an observation that has been made over and over. This is a groups of 5 evacuating, right? compared to the same crowd, when they are not grouped, it takes significantly longer. So I was wondering, is there any manipulation to group behavior that I do to make the crowd more efficient? Is there any manipulation? So I did a manipulation here. I told them to hold hands. I told them to hold hands. Do you know what the impact was? Almost nothing, or even to the detriment of the system. Almost nothing, or even to the detriment of the system. But then I told them in a different set of experiments to get the back of each other's clothes and platoon. Who was asking about platooning? Yes, to platoon. Just get the back of each other's clothes. The system gets significantly more efficient. In terms of efficiency, it goes back to the level that we did not even have social groups and everybody was individuals. It goes back to that level. So the whole efficiency that we lose as a result of having social groups gets eliminated by introducing this strategy. This has been done by groups of 3 and by groups of 5, and it's been replicated across. This is not simulation, this is just a visualization of the experiment that I just showed you so that you can see these groups in a better way while they move. Let's have a look. So this is a group of 3 hand holding, but this is a group of 3 platooning, right? This is a group of 5 hand holding, group of 5 platooning. It turns out the area that the groups occupy and claim usually does not get violated by other groups, right? So if there is a group of 5, usually subconsciously they claim an area, a polygon, and other groups do not violate them, right? If this is the case, this means that they leave a bigger signature and impact on the space compared to a situation where there was no group and these polygons were not forming. So it occupies a lot of space. It leaves a bigger signature and an impact and a footprint on the space compared to when the groups were non-existent. When you ask them to platoon, these areas minimize, right? These areas, these polygons, they minimize, and as a result, these areas become usable for other groups to use, and as such, efficiency comes back. Let me show you the results. Come on, where is it? Okay. This is the evacuation time of people when everybody was single individuals, right? This is the evacuation time of the same number of people, when we put them in groups of 3 and no strategy. The evacuation time of people when we put them in groups of 3 and got them to handhold, no difference. The evacuation time of people when we put them in groups of 3 and we got them to platoon. It comes back to the level of individuals, right? Or even slightly better. The same number of people, when we put them in groups of 5, things got even worse, right, than groups of 3. When we got them to handhold, the difference is not statistically significant, but when we got them to platoon, the difference became significant, and it got back to a level comparable to when we did not have groups. So it actually does matter if you have groups of 3, if you have groups of 5. Groups of 5 are actually worse than groups of 3. That's the case. So that is the magic of behavioral intervention. A simple strategy that everybody can easily adopt and remember and recall during an emergency, and everybody would be better off because the system overall is better off. And not everything is about giving people actual strategies. Do we have sound on this laptop, by the way? Yes. Do we? If I play it, is it going to? I don't think we do. No, we don't have it. Let me try. If you could just, this is the last slide. So, while we are on it, is there anything that we can manipulate with respect to behavior of people without directly communicating with them? It's called in behavioral economics nudging, right? Is there a way we can manipulate the behavior of people in our favor with subtle cues, indirect cues, without even communicating? This could be done in large scale events when we don't have access to. Oh well, yeah. Thank you. So, no, come on. No. Okay. This is at very preliminary stage. This is something that at the end of the experiments I wanted to explore. Yes, I've given people instructions, but I want to know, is there any indirect way, such as rhythmic cues? Okay? The flow of people without any rhythms, this would be the naive group of people. Then I subject them to different types of music, military marches, different rhythms, 8 different types of music, and look at the system efficiency. But then the question is, yes, this has a better traffic flow characteristics. What if 50% of the crowd are not in compliant and just do not have a bar of the music? I asked the 50% of the crowd to tune out and intentionally ignore the music. The system became less efficient than the original system. So this is very tricky. If not all people comply, then the system becomes even less efficient than not doing anything. And this is even more prominent when you have two conflicting flows, bidirectional flows. No rhythmic cues. Look at the lane formation. When there is music rhythms, the lane formation is quicker, the system stabilizes, and the system the equilibrium does not break down that often. On the other side, when you have people who do not comply with the rhythm, it actually introduces further inefficiencies to the crowd. Lane formation takes longer, and once they are formed, they break down very often. I think you get the idea. My message at the end of this is that crowd dynamics is not all about modeling. We need to shift our focus a bit more community-based. There are things that can be done at the level of community that we are always ignoring just because they are not really good publication material, although these are publication material now. So there are areas where we can do research and get published and also make actual differences in terms of improving crowd safety outcomes. And that's something that I'm advocating for in this domain. I hope you found this useful. Thank you.